Hi, I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Mary Rose.
And welcome back to our podcast, Going Through Scripture. Today, we are throwing it back.
Yeah, we're starting the book of Exodus.
So, all the way back to the second book in the Old Testament. What can you tell me about Exodus, Mary Rose, as we get started?
Well, it starts out with Israel now being enslaved.
Anything else you want to share about Exodus that you remember, or memories from your child?
Well, I mean, the story of Moses and parting the Red Sea and all of that stuff.
Yeah, so some pretty big events and pretty formative story for the history and the people of Israel in general. You know, I think actually, I mean, it's hard to say there's a more important or less important book, but I actually think that Exodus might be the most important book in the Old Testament.
Why is that?
Well, because Genesis foreshadows Exodus, and Exodus foreshadows and kind of sets up the language that is used by the prophets, by the psalmists, by the people of God later in the historical books, looking back and looking forward. And it's the primary metaphor for the New Testament, and speaking of language, it defines what redemption is for us. It gives us the framework for that story. And I think that's the most important kind of story about what God is going to do in light of what happened because of the fall, which we skipped over Genesis. We're just jumping into Exodus. But because of sin, this story in Exodus shows us and foreshadows how God is going to repeatedly deliver his people. And so it's probably the most referenced story, along with just the creation in general, in the rest of Scripture. And I think if you understand and dig deep into this story, it helps you understand most of the rest of the books of the Bible a lot better. So it's a worthwhile endeavor, I think, to jump into it. What does the word Exodus mean?
To leave?
Yeah, or to be brought out. Yeah. So two ways or themes, I guess, might be a better way than talking about Exodus than summaries is what I mean. And the two kind of themes are the deliverance from whatever enslaves us, and so that we are now belonging to God. We become his people and no one else. And in response, we have grateful, joyful obedience. And then the second theme is that God makes himself known. So it's about God revealing himself to the people of Israel and to Pharaoh as the one who has power, the one who delivers, the one who has chosen his people and wants to be known personally. And so we'll dig more into that throughout the Bible study, but those are the kind of two big themes. So then, do you want to read chapter 1 for us, Mary Rose?
Sure. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them.
One, it's interesting because mine starts the same way with the first verse, but the actual first word, if you will, in the Hebrew is and, which is a weird way to start a book. But if you actually translated the Hebrew, the first marker is, and these are the names of the sons of Israel, which is a weird way to start it. But what we have is, in fact, is the connection to what has already come to pass in Genesis. So it's a repetition of Genesis 46:8, when the sons of Israel come down. And it says, and these are the names. It's the very same line in Hebrew. But then oddly enough, the order of the names is different. It follows the order in Genesis 35. And so that's the actual birth order, not not the order of hierarchy that comes later. And so one of the things that Exodus is trying to do is show that this is a continuation of the story that has happened in Genesis, which isn't shocking to us. But Moses is clearly indicating that this is now the continuation. It's tied to all that came before it. And we just heard the other day from one of our college students something that really struck me. And the line that she was sharing from somebody else was, you can only look forward to the past, and the future is always behind you. I think that's how she phrased it.
Well, sort of. She basically was comparing the fact that we say we look forward to the future and behind us is in the past, but in other cultures, some other cultures, they would say they look to the past because that's what's already happened. So they've experienced it, they know it, so they can look to it. Whereas the future is unknown, so it's still behind them.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting that and remembering that more accurately. But I think Moses, by starting with "and," is saying, remember all that came before. Remember the stories. Remember what happened to Adam and the promise to Noah and the promise to Abraham and the promise to Isaac and the promise to Jacob and the promise to his sons. And so it starts by calling back to those things. It reminds us to think of what has come before and how they got there even. So they got there, right, because Joseph had come to power. And he had come in to favor with Pharaoh. He's second in charge in the land at that point. It's interesting. We call it Exodus because they're going to leave the land and go out. But the Hebrew name for this book is really, these are the names. That's the title of the book in Hebrew. Because they just go with the first line. So it's the title of the book. Which I don't know what to make of that. That's just their tradition. But it starts, therefore, with saying there's also a context into which this story is coming and happening that you should know. And so we need to know that there were some promises made. And there were some promises made to Abraham and through Jacob that their descendants would go to another land and they would serve another master before God would bring them out after 400 years. That was already predicted in Genesis. And so it sets up the context of where we are. And so we kind of have this foreshadowed. And then we have these names listed. And it notes that there were 70 people that go down. I believe it said that here, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. There were 70 people that went down. And it says they were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied. Now, where have we heard that language about fruitful and multiply?
In the garden.
Not only in the garden.
After Noah.
And both of them.
Oh, okay.
And is a promise to
Abraham.
I can't remember if it's to Abraham or if it's to Isaac, but yes, to the patriarchs. It's a repeated promise that I will make you fruitful and I will multiply your descendants. And so that they've done this is saying, see, God has been faithful to his promises. God has delivered on those things. It says in verse 6 and verse 7, so Joseph died and all of that generation, but the people of Israel, so they were increased and grew exceedingly strong, and they filled the land. Verse 7, the actual word is teem or swarm. The land is teeming with them or swarming with them. Which, what does that make you think of? If you think of something swarming.
Locusts?
Probably, yeah. Right? I mean, that's kind of like almost like a derogatory term.
Yeah.
But it seems to show, well, if you have a swarm of locusts, you're going to think they're a threat, right? So it might be foreshadowing what's about to happen with Pharaoh and how he views them. And how he kind of sees these people. And
then he gets some locusts of his own.
Yes, that will happen. And he sees the people of Israel as a plague. We haven't gotten there yet, but yes. Verse 6, this is jumping forward, but it kind of reminds me where it talks about Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. If you remember the end of Joshua and the beginning of Judges, do you remember that phrase coming up? Because it does. At the end of Joshua, beginning of the book of Judges. And what happens after Joshua and that generation that took the promised land dies? What happens to people?
They fall away.
They become unfaithful. They forget God. And so it might be setting up a note of some people that they may have forgotten God in that generation. We want to pick it up at verse 8.
Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and, if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Sifra and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that a baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live.
Now we get what the problem is for the Israelites and kind of what's the situation they found themselves in. And it starts with there's a new king over Egypt. And notice it doesn't say Pharaoh. That language disappears until the story near the end when, I think it's back in verse 19. Before that, it doesn't say Pharaoh again. So I think there's some wordplay going on and dismissal of the title and claim that Pharaoh is making and that the name means. Because the pharaohs would have said they were gods, but they're saying he's just a king, a ruler over this land, and not really the god, I think is kind of what's going on there. But we have a problem in verse 8, and what's the problem that comes up?
A new king has come that doesn't have a relationship with Joseph.
Yeah, doesn't know Joseph. And know is a loaded word in Hebrew. So it can mean like the intimacy in like a sexual relationship, which that's not what it means, but it means knowing someone. And it's kind of the same language that God says he desires that the people would know him, right? Have that intimacy and have a real relationship with him. And so it's not, I don't think that it's that he doesn't know about Joseph, but he doesn't care about him, dismissed him, has forgotten the story, doesn't care about who Joseph is. That it may still be there, but it seems like this new Pharaoh, and most commentators have taken this to mean a new line, a new dynasty of rulers have arisen in Egypt. So it's not just a new Pharaoh, but a new people that are ruling, because there were multiple lines that, when they took over, became the new pharaohs. Now, we don't know when exactly this takes place. There's typically two theories, and one is about 1500 AD, and the other one is 1200 AD, I believe. And the later date, the one that's closer to us, is typically associated with the pharaohs named Ramses, because, well, if you're making a store city named Ramses, you'd assume it would be named after them. But there are some other words. Ramses is a title, and so it has other meanings to those words, and so it could have very well been used earlier or been renamed in light of his rule. And so there's also a lot of discussion about it being under Amenhotep and I think the second and Tutmos as the pharaohs. And that would be a little earlier, and that works a little better with some of the dates in scripture, but it's pretty divided evenly among scholars. There isn't really consensus. And we don't know, and it's frustrating to us because I'm sure they knew full well the name of the pharaoh, which one it was, and they chose not to name him. But this isn't meant to be world history, but the acts of God's salvation. The pharaoh, in the end, isn't really that important. It's about God delivering his people. And so it's one of those two. And then notice the pharaoh has some... one, he's worried that the people of Israel have become too many. They're swarming around, right? There's too many of them. And so let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. What's the irony of that sentence?
I mean, it's exactly what happens, that they leave the land.
So he's afraid that they're going to fight against him and leave the land. And the very actions he's going to do throughout the next 14 chapters will drive them, lead them to him sending them out of the land. Mm-hmm. So it's the irony of, especially for those who know the story, of a pharaoh who's trying to act shrewdly and wisely, and everything he does just ends up causing the opposite of what he thinks it's going to do.
Sure. Well, and I mean, I know this isn't like an exhaustive history book, like you said, but we don't have any indication that the Jews are like, causing an upheaval or uprisings or trying to gain power. Like, we don't have any indication of that. So this is based purely on like fear, worst case scenario type of thinking.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the point I was going to make later, but the they language, right? Lest they multiply and rise against us. It's casting other people as the enemy immediately, right? It is stereotyping people. They're those kinds of people that will do this, and driving up the fear even in his own people of the Israelites, who, as far as we know, have been nothing but faithful herders and a faithful part of the community in Egypt, and haven't been causing problems. Now, to be sure, it could be another foreign dynasty that's taken over that could lead all those things, but we don't know that for sure. It just says that he views them as a threat. And that's, again, putting the worst construction on just their existence in general, which is common, right? We see somebody that's different from us, and we have this tendency to view them with fear and anxiety. And so immediately his plan is to then afflict them. And I wonder if the plan is thinking that, if we set the hard taskmasters over them, if we make it hard labor, a number of them will die under that without the break. They won't last. They're not going to be able to survive. They'll be too broken down to do anything to rise against us. And it's cheap labor, right? Because they're going to build store cities for them. And so, really, it's building up their economy by exploitation, preparing their grain. And we'll talk about this later, but God calls on us to live by daily bread and by the bread that he provides alone. And while Pharaoh wants to build store cities, how do the people of Israel get by, particularly once they get into the wilderness?
Well, by daily bread from God.
The manna from heaven, right? It's a very... The Pharaoh thinks he can store up all these things, prepare all these things, hold on to all this stuff. And God says, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. And we see almost a direct parallel to this in the story of the rich man who, right, wants to build up barns in Luke 12, of the rich fool in the parable, right, who says, oh, I've got this great abundance. I know what I'll do. I'll build up more things. I'll build up bigger barns, and I'll tell myself, rest and be easy. And she says, you fool, this night, your life will be demanded of you. And Pharaoh's acting the exact same way right here. So maybe Jesus got the idea for that parable from knowing the history. And then we have a pretty good idea where Ramses is. Pithom, there's a lot of discussion about. There's a lot of just different thoughts or ideas about where this might be. But there is archaeological evidence, at least for Ramses and Pithom. There's some discussion, but we don't. That city was lost at some point, and we don't know where it is. And if you know Egypt, which I don't know it intimately because I've never been there, but cities can get lost and wiped away just with the desert, with the sand blowing over. And if it was destroyed at any point, we just aren't exactly sure which city it is that they built up. There's speculation, but people don't know for sure. I find it interesting that kind of in this section, while we would say that they were slaves in Egypt, it doesn't really describe the forced labor, at least not graphically. It says it was hard, but it doesn't say they were beaten. It doesn't say any other things like that. While it does describe it later as an iron furnace and a house of bondage, or today, like a slave cage might be a good way of talking about it, yet when it's remembered later in the scripture, it's never recounted or told again as an exercise in collective self-pity. Instead, it's often used as a warning not to subject any other people or temporary residents among the Israelites to the same experience. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, therefore don't treat other people like this. And we see that in Leviticus 19:33 and Deuteronomy 5:14 and 15. And so to this day as Christians, when we see oppression, God's people are called to side with the oppressed and not with the oppressors. And that can sometimes be uncomfortable for us. Usually the oppressed are the ones who are marginalized, who don't have all the resources, who don't have a voice. There's put yourself,
not anything in it for you to defend the oppressed.
You put yourself on the line.
Yeah.
And so, but that's the call that God places upon us.
So verse 12 says that the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So do you think like verses like 11 to 14 is happening over like 10, 20 years? Like how long does it take to notice that they're still multiplying?
Well, we don't know how long they were enslaved. So it could just be 2 generations. That's typically the way. Like there's the first Pharaoh, because he dies, then Moses comes back later. So there's at least 2 Pharaohs, the Pharaoh of the enslavement and the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
Okay.
But what we do know is, how many did it say came down? How many men?
70.
So let's say, just guessing, there's probably about 140 that come down, or that are in Egypt with Joseph at that beginning. Most of the estimates of how many people leave Egypt is almost always put at about 2 million. And if that's 400 years, it's about 14 generations. It means it's multiplied 14 times. Like doubled 14 times.
Where did you get 400 years? I thought you just said it was only 2 generations.
The last part. But from when they came down to Egypt to when they leave is 400 years. But we don't know how long the enslavement was. So they came down under Joseph.
Oh.
And we don't know when they were enslaved. We just know that at some point, a new Pharaoh comes about who doesn't know Joseph and begins to enslave the people. Now, we don't know if they were enslaved for 200 years or 2 generations. We don't have that.
They went from 70 or 140
to 2 million when they left.
So it seems like it has to be more than 2 generations.
That's why I said about 14 is
Okay.
usually the estimate, because that's 400 years. I think that estimates out to about 14 generations. But still, for it to happen in that time, that would mean in each generation, the population would have to double. Mm-hmm. Which is, think about the mortality rate. Even today, we consider it low in the Western world, and it's what I think like 80% survive. It might be higher than that.
Childbirth?
Yeah, in childbirth. I think it's like 80. But in most of the world, and especially back then, it would have been roughly around like 50%. And so like, God is clearly, something divine is happening for them to be multiplying at such a swarming, alarming rate. Right? Like they're multiplying like...
it is much lower than 50% back then.
Okay.
Because like that's the primary reason that like life expectancy now is so much higher. It's like people who live to be old aren't actually living longer. It's just we don't have the child mortality rate dragging us down. Like, so many people died in the first 2 years of their life.
Yeah, sure. So the fact that many have survived, thrived, and multiplied is like another way of seeing God's favor being bestowed upon them, and how this is clearly the hand of God. So you can understand, though, if you see a population that just like everyone seems to be surviving and like their numbers are just exploding and filling the land, that if you're afraid of, for lack of a better term, those people, in quotes, right? Like the people that aren't us, you can understand why he begins to view them in language of like a swarm, a threat, that there could be an enemy for us. And so the shocking thing is he thinks that hard labor is going to cause them to decrease, but it only causes them to increase all the more. So all of his strategies seem to be failing. He begins to then try a different strategy.
And this strategy makes no sense to me.
Tell me more. What do you mean?
So his strategy of like letting the girls live but killing the boys. Like, there's a finite number of like women that can be pregnant at any given time. But like a single man could make 100 women pregnant at one time. Like, if you were interested in population control, you'd think he would take out the women.
Except they don't care, and they'll take them into their household. If there are no men, they'll make them slaves. They'll make children. They'll become part of their clan. Right? That's what you see happening.
Sorry, who will take them into whose house? Will take women?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. That's the thought he has. Kind of like you see when even when Israel begins to conquer the Promised Land, they kill a lot of the people, but when they take over some of those that God doesn't command them to wipe out the whole population, they kill the men and the women who have given birth, and they take the virgins as their own. It increases the population. You have more people to give childbirth, more offspring that further your seed. Sketchy, to be sure. Uncomfortable for us today, to be sure. But it is what happened. And so, yeah, I mean, it is also an interesting strategy. Now, we don't know if these are the only 2 midwives, which seems unlikely for a population of 2 million, but maybe they are just overworked like that, or maybe they're just representative. But it's interesting, and I think it's part of God's sense of humor. Because who did we say we don't get a name of?
The Pharaoh.
So we don't get a name of the king of Egypt, but 2 lowly midwives who are servants. Well, they're both named. They get a prominent place in this story, remembered forever. For Pharaoh, he's not that important. Now, and the irony is, we'll see, because what does God do for the midwives because of their actions? What does he give them?
He also gives them families.
He gives them a family. And do you know what the word Pharaoh means?
No.
It's house. It's another word for house.
Okay.
So like dynasty or home. So Pharaoh's trying to end the house and the lineage of the Hebrews. And as he's trying to thwart their house and is the head, God thwarts his plan and gives a house to the people who were faithful to him.
I think it's interesting we straight up have God blessing people for their lie. It's like an interesting look.
Yes, I was going to talk about that, but we'll go there and then I'll go back to the other thing afterwards. Because that's a question that I think we have to wrestle with. Is their lie a sin? What do you think?
Well, to sin is to go against the will of God. Is that a fair definition of sin?
Yeah. To miss the mark, yeah.
So, I mean, I guess if God doesn't view it as a sin, it's not. Because God is God. And if it were sinful, God wouldn't bless them.
Maybe. I mean, God blesses us when we're sinful.
But I mean, it's so like cause and effect.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
so God was kind to the midwives. Like, that immediately follows the lie.
Yeah.
Like, it almost sounds like because they did that, God was kind to them.
I think you're right. That's how I would read it too. Theologians have disagreed on this all over the spectrum. So St. Augustine read this and said, all lies are sinful. That was his read. All, period. Because, right, the Ten Commandments, all lies are sinful.
We don't have the Ten Commandments yet, though.
Yep. But he would say, all lies are sinful. Thomas Aquinas said there are 3 types of lies. There's one that is to harm. One, so like harming someone's reputation
Sure.
or just
Like slander.
slandering someone. Yep. A second type is to protect or help someone. And a third is in jest. So like a joke, right? You make a punchline. You say something slightly deceitful that is meant in jest.
I definitely thought you were going to say the third is to like puff yourself up. I feel like he left out one.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that would also be harm, though. Because you're...
Not necessarily.
Well, that's not included in there.
Okay.
I mean, that would be boasting, and they would think that's a sin, too. But Luther seems to be of the position that it's contextual. So he would say morals don't exist in a vacuum,
Sure.
but in what is best for our neighbor, right? Relating it back to love thy neighbor as thyself. So, therefore, Luther likely wouldn't have time for moral prissiness. I took that from somebody else. That would rather tell the truth to a Gestapo agent who asked where a Jewish friend is hiding than sully your conscience by telling a lie, to use an often cited example. Since the action of the midwives are viewed favorably and they receive a house from God, we should assume their actions were pleasing in his sight. That's how I would read it. Which is kind of what you said.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think, would God say that they were doing the right thing by handing over babies to be murdered? I don't think so. So I think they're choosing to disobey and lie rather than disobey God.
Right. I was just thinking about like that, how that kind of follows our like belief about obeying politicians even today. Like, we're commanded to follow the rules of the land so far, but if they go against what God has told us, then no. So it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's also that like challenge of, but how bold should we be in saying that we're not going to follow it? Or that we're not, like, do we just do it under the cover of night and lie about it? Which I think if you're in World War II Germany, that probably is the right move. Because if you say it, then you're going to be taken away and killed, and all the people you could help are going to be taken away and killed. So in that instance, it probably is the right thing to lie. Now, Peter and John go before the politicians and they don't lie. They say, well, if it's right to obey you rather than God, you must decide. But we're going to keep doing this thing. But that wasn't the same as handing somebody else over to their death. So I think context again, right, matters. And so I think it's important to think about all of that. And as we think about, we were talking earlier about the difference in how we would think Pharaoh is important and the midwives are unimportant, at least socially speaking.
Sure.
It follows this pattern that we've already seen in Genesis. Because why does God choose Abraham?
I don't know.
So that his grace and his glory might be displayed. God says repeatedly to him, I didn't choose you because you were more numerous or more powerful. I chose you because you were nothing and insignificant, so that my glory might be displayed. So, thinking of language that will run throughout the rest of Scripture, God takes dead things. Abraham, by the time he finally has an offspring, is 100. Sarah's 90. She's dead. She's a stump. There's no hope left. They're clean cut off. But God makes a way so that they can't take credit for it.
Well, I mean, there's loads of stories, too, in Genesis that are like the lower person being raised up, right? For no like real reason, you know, like we have Jacob who kills
Jacob I loved
Esau,
and Esau I hated. Yeah.
and Jacob gets the birthright. And then, I mean, even Joseph, who's the youngest son, who shouldn't have the favor of his father, who shouldn't be the one that will save his family, you know, he is the one that's elevated.
Well, and ultimately, who's the other one that's elevated unexpectedly in Genesis? That's very key for our messianic lineage. Of the 12 sons of Jacob, what tribe is Jesus of?
Judah.
Yeah. So Judah is not the one that should get the birthright. But Simeon, Reuben, and Levi all do things that cause them to be removed from that position. So Judah, the fourth in line, is the one that gets the promise, the blessing. He's the one who's elevated and raised up. He's the one, when they go to see Joseph at the end, who takes the leadership role, who's set up as the leader of God's people even there. Foreshadowing what will come later. And, you know, we hear some other things coming later of some people coming out of the tribe of Judah is foreshadowed at the end of Genesis in Jacob's speech, and then again later from Moses and from Balaam later on in the Pentateuch. So that shocking elevation of someone lower. And so it kind of follows and again sets up that pattern. So in verse 11, the Hebrew word serve can connote slavery, which is how we would take it here, right? They're slaves, but it doesn't have to.
I don't have the word serve, so I'm just
in
wondering.
Verse 11, it's the root for taskmaster, for afflict them with heavy burdens where they served. So it's used there.
Oh, mine says forced labor.
So yeah, that would be the service.
Okay.
Force them to serve.
Okay.
And this Hebrew word, however, is also used for worship. And I think that matters.
Okay, hold on. The same Hebrew word used for servant.
For service.
For
serve.
service.
So what did you say? Hard labor?
Forced labor.
Yeah. Which is for service, right?
Sure.
Is the same word used for worship.
Well, I mean, we call it a worship service.
Yes. So this is therefore, in their context as slaves here, is conceived of as service offered to a deity. Pharaoh is the god, right, in their culture. And so what's about to take place in Exodus, in the plague narratives, is a contest over whom Israel will serve. That is worship. Between Yahweh and Pharaoh, who has set himself up as a rival deity. So after their liberation, Israel will learn in the wilderness at Mount Sinai what it is to worship Yahweh, and what it means and what it requires. And they will construct at Yahweh's direction, a tabernacle for his service. Not store cities, but they'll be called on to build a tabernacle, a house, for his service. And so there's also the wordplay, therefore, between the Hebrew word between storage city and tabernacle. They're a very similar word in etymology. I don't have them written down here. But so, thus they are freed from building cities for Pharaoh to build a tabernacle for its true and legitimate king and sovereign and Lord. Which is, I find really interesting anyways.
Yeah.
And so I think also the language here that we talked about earlier about fruitful and multiply is brought up again in verse 12. And the women say that verse 19, that they're not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth. And that word in 19 might be...
which word?
For vigorous.
Okay.
Could also be lively or unusually tough. And which seems like a really unflattering word to call women in some senses. I think that possibly these midwives are trying to use animalistic language to come. We can't stop them. They're going to multiply. I think it's playing on his fears. Or at least playing on that language.
Could be seeking to like demean them as like less than human.
It could be.
Or I mean, put up appearances of demeaning them.
Right, like they could be saying like, they're like animals. We can't even do anything, and so that's their excuse for why they can't help them. Which there is the other one point that I wanted to make in verse 16. It's the Hebrew word for, we often translate it the birth stool, which we actually don't know what that word means. We're making our best guess because the only other place that word is used is in Jeremiah, where it means like the potter's disc that spins, which I don't know how much to make of this, but I think the literal way to translate it, and you see upon the two discs, is how they're born, which is a weird phrase. I don't know what it means, but it's often translated like birthing stone or birthing stool. But Jeremiah 18:3 is the only other place that word is used, and it means the potter's wheel by context, we know, because it's talking about the potter. But the potter's wheel was associated with the Egyptian god Khnum, I don't know how to pronounce that, who was a potter who created in their mythology the first people out of clay. So it could have been an association with that, but we don't really know. But so it could be also showing that God, even there again, is the one who actually reigns, that the Egyptian gods couldn't even subdue the Israelite women. So God is ultimately the one in control in all of this. It doesn't appear like it, but he's still the one protecting and guiding his people.
I mean, I just pictured some strange stool with like a hole in the middle so you deliver the baby through it.
Maybe. I honestly don't know. And like there is this phrase, like, or even the early rabbis and the translators of the Septuagint don't seem to know what to do with it. People that comment, even from stuff before, like, Christianity that we have, like, they don't know what to make of that phrase.
What about, like, Egyptologists?
That's where they, like, the closest thing they can come up with is that they think it might have to do with that god, but they don't really know. Because that phrase is not found anywhere in their, like, mythology. Like, we have, like, the language of potter, but we don't have it in that context of birth. And so we don't know. And then just note, I want to talk about the last verse because this kind of sets up again some irony for us that know. Verse 22, what's commanded of every Hebrew son or boy? What's they're supposed to do?
They're supposed to be thrown into the Nile.
So, where has water come up already in Scripture prior to Exodus? Two very important scenes.
Well, Noah's Ark and the flood.
Okay, so that's one. Genesis 1, verse 3. The Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. So the waters of creation. So, we already start to get a picture that maybe some sort of deliverance, some sort of new creation, or new people is going to come. Because at creation, God formed Adam and Eve out of nothing, and there was a new beginning. And after the flood, it's the beginning of a new people, starting with Noah. So maybe we should expect that God's going to bring about some sort of new people through this story.